last polling stations have just closed a couple hours ago. According to the Central Election Committee, more than one-third of the votes are already counted, with roughly 75% of them in favor of the constitutional amendments. The turnout, despite the political season is long over and the quarantine restrictions are still present in many of the Russian regions, the turnout was rather high, over 65%. But again, there is frankly nothing unpredictable. At least nobody here expected the referendum to fail. The vote miraculously coincided with the military parade to honor the 75th anniversary of the victory in the Second World War. So Putin had at least 3 consecutive opportunities to address the nation before the vote. The voting process itself has been stretched for almost a week now. So it's not just today that we could have voted. And many Russians were allowed to cast their ballots in absence or electronically. So the outcome was very predictable from the start and did not catch anybody off guard here.
All right, 75% it looks like he's getting of the vote. Is he that popular?
Well, it's hard to say if it represents the popularity of Putin's persona. I think that it doesn't really say much about the public attitude to the government in Putin in particular. There were numerous examples in history of similar votes with similar levels of approval. Take Chile in 1980, when Pinochet decided to amend his constitution. He won the overwhelming support, which did not last too long. Putin's ratings are in sharp decline now because of the very painful situation in the economy, also because of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, which is still causing devastating effect on the Russian provinces, as I mentioned. So I think we should treat the referendum as an attempt by the Russian authorities to prepare themselves for the turbulence, which most likely they will meet ahead. And we will soon know if it's going to be really effective.
All right, let's talk a little bit about what people were actually voting for. What are the amendments?
I think it's going to take us too much time to go through all of them. There are dozens of them, 206 to be exact, of minor and major importance. In fact, the whole constitution inherited by Russia from Boris Yeltsin, who drafted the current version in 1993, is going to be updated in one way or another. Most of the amendments are purely demagogical, and they don't deserve to be discussed here, such as the one that proclaims Russian territories inseparable, for example, although the government preserves the right to redraw borders if it wills, such as those that declare the priority of the Russian laws over international agreements. For the first time, marriage is defined, is mentioned in the Constitution as an alliance of a man and a woman. But again, I don't think it does have any serious meaning for Russians. The Russian language will be proclaimed official language of the state. God, for the first time ever, is going to be mentioned in the Constitution. But this all is very insignificant in comparison with one paragraph that is lifting the limit for Putin to run for president twice more, potentially extending his rule until 2036. I want to say that there's no certainty if Putin is going to stay in power for so long, but it definitely lays down the foundation for the political transition, which is the main concern for the Russian ruling elites in the midst of the global pandemic and the economic crisis we're all living through.
All right, so he hasn't decided, but he's strong, he's fit, and he's moved the goalposts in the past, becoming prime minister for a time, de facto, and then coming back as president. It all seems as if it's built for someone who wants to stay in power.
You know, I think that we should not perceive Putin as a leader as a persona, as a strong leader, and that's it. I think that he represents the political class who promoted him to this post in 1999. There are whole layers of the Russian elite, of the Russian oligarchy, who have very high stakes associated with his personality. So the question is not whether Putin stays. The question is whether this class keeps the property that they inherited from the privatization of the 90s. If they keep control of the government, if they keep control over the Russian economy. So Putin, however popular or unpopular, however powerful or weak he is not the most important figure here, in my opinion. We are talking about the most serious political transformation in the history of Russia from 1990s. There are two types of statistics here: the official data and the real one that we can see on the streets. And the farther we are drowning in the crisis, the more these statistics differ. For example, there are more YouTube viewers now than the audience of the state-owned traditional television stations. And whenever Putin is addressing the internet audience, for example, if he's going live on YouTube, he's getting hundreds of thousands or even millions of dislikes on YouTube. And this disproportion is very visible, and definitely it contradicts the statistics that is given by the government. I don't think, and I'm not trying to say that his whole popularity is fake. He's still definitely enjoying pretty vast support among the population, but the pillars of his popularity are eroding. His most loyal populace, the retired pensioners, the Russian retired, got extremely disenfranchised with Putin in the last during this last year after the pension reform he promoted. The middle class is also very disappointed. It is hurt very badly by the COVID crisis, and unlike in other countries, the Russian middle class was given almost zero support from the government. So I'm pretty sure there is no way for the government to cement such declining popularity through the constitutional reform.
Yeah. There are some critics that suggest that the Kremlin has purposefully not made this vote as transparent as it could be and open for scrutiny. Do you think that it's been less than transparent, lending suggestions that perhaps some of it could have been engineered?
You know, I think it's a very typical thing for the Russians. There's nothing unusual. I don't think that anybody, this level of transparency is not very unusual. I don't know personally, I don't know anybody who would take today's vote seriously. The whole process is not even causing outrage anymore, because most of the people see the whole outcome as predetermined. Even Alexei Navalny, a rather prominent opposition figure here, who was once very active in his attempts to defeat Putin at the polls, although he was never allowed to run for office, he now changed his tactics and his position, and he just called his supporters to simply ignore the referendum as pure nonsense.
All right. You mentioned a little bit earlier on about marriages, and it seems that it's going to be quite clear that there's going to be a ban on same-sex marriages. Is this President Putin trying to court the more conservative part of Russia and perhaps trying to get some mileage from perhaps the Orthodox Church in the country? Well,
I definitely think that he's playing with such mood of the generic public, but I don't think there will be any effect on the way people register their relations, their marriages after the vote, because same-sex marriages are not legal in Russia now, so nothing changes in reality. And at the same time, it does not prevent such couples from living the way they like to, they prefer to, and they are enjoying a rather relaxed lives right now. They're not being prosecuted. There's no literal ban, as you called it. So I don't think there will be any significant visible change in that regard. I'm sure the only reason it was put on the list of the amendments was to play, as you said, with the Russian conservative mindset, to win over the Russian traditionalists. And probably the ones who are very religious. But there are some, I mean, Russia is very complex and contradictory in this regard. There are some openly gay people in the Russian government, right next to Putin, and it is not a secret for the people. So again, this is all seen by many Russians as a sort of a game where the script and the climax part are already written in advance.
All right. So you said again a bit earlier on that you know there isn't even any outrage because people kind of just expect this. We have seen demonstrations in Russia in recent years, recent months. Is there an appetite still for sort of rising up against some of the decisions of the Kremlin, or are people just kind of quietly accepting the status quo?
I don't think that people are worried with what the Kremlin is doing. They are mostly concerned about the economy, and the economy is very bad. And that's why I think that, I mean, it's not visible on the streets, but it's in the air. The storm is brewing, and people are getting very, very disappointed with the way the government is tackling the crisis. Frankly, they don't care about the amendments. They don't care about the cosmetic reforms. They are mostly focused on their daily lives, the way they feed their families. And if they are losing jobs, and if due to quarantine measures they are not getting sufficient medical support, they're getting very, very disappointed, and that's what's happening now. I can tell you that as an eyewitness. Will that ever transform into political will to protest? It's very early to say, but I do think that the turbulence that the government would like to avoid through this referendum is literally unavoidable. It's right ahead of us.